here is our host, Yan Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. We begin from the Korean Peninsula, where the DPRK fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles from the eastern port city of Wonsan on Thursday morning. They flew about 430 kilometers to the east and reached an altitude of 50 kilometers before splashing down. This is after the Kim-Trump meeting on June the 30th at the border village of Panmunjom, where they agreed to resume denuclearization talks.
The DPRK fired 2 short-range missiles on Thursday morning. The second missile appeared to be a new design that had not been seen before. It was the DPRK's second launch of short-range projectiles this year, as the country fired 2 similar projectiles on May 9. South Korea said it was working with the U.S. to monitor launches.
South Korea and U.S. militaries are sharing detailed information about North Korea's firing of projectiles, which are presumed to be short-range missiles, and conducting an analysis. South Korean government has been closely monitoring the related moves of North Korea, and we urge North Korea to stop such actions that do not help the efforts to relieve tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
The U.S. State Department reiterated diplomatic engagement with the DPRK. Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said, "We continue to urge the North Koreans to resolve all of the things that the President and that Chairman Kim have talked about through diplomacy."
This is my honor.
Thursday's missile launches come after DPRK leader Kim and Mr. Trump agreed to revive denuclearization talks with working-level negotiations set for mid-July. But things soured after the U.S. and South Korea announced a joint military exercise in August. Kim slammed South Korea for double-dealing with the purchase of ultra-modern offensive weapons and holding joint military exercises with the United States. Earlier this week, the DPRK leader also inspected a new submarine, which should raise the range of the country's missiles. What's next for Korean Peninsula diplomacy?
What's next for Korean Peninsula diplomacy? In Washington, D.C., Michael O'Halloran, Senior Fellow from the Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence, also Director of the Research for Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Joining us in Washington, D.C. as well, Soo Kim, a former CIA North Korean analyst and currently a policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. Welcome to both of you. And also in our Beijing studio, it's an honor to have Zhao Tong, Fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Let me start by asking you, Mr. O'Halloran, since you are a security expert, what does it mean, the short-range missiles and the earlier submarine test? What does it say about the DPRK's capability, nuclear capability particularly?
Greetings. Well, there are 2 ways to interpret the tests, I think. One is in narrow military terms, as modest improvements in capabilities that North Korea already has had, but perhaps these missiles could be a bit more dependable. There's some talk that the missiles might be more powerful and could fly lower and therefore evade radar longer. I don't know if that's really a meaningful improvement. I don't know enough about the flight characteristics of the test to be sure. But I think that's one way to look at these. But I think the more compelling way is that North Korea is simply trying to remind the world that they are not happy with the current state of affairs, with the sanctions that have been applied against them being so powerful, and they're worried that the momentum in the U.S. And DPRK nuclear negotiations has been lost, and that this is sort of the best moment for them to try to get a deal with Donald Trump still in the White House and still investing a lot of personal time and diplomacy in the nuclear issue, and so they don't want to be forgotten. And they want to make sure that they turn up the temperature to get attention in Seoul and Washington, rather than have this issue sort of recede and just be put on the back burner, because they can't really live very well with the current sanctions. I believe that was the message out of Hanoi. I think that's the fundamental reality.
Ms. Kim, of course, there are mixed reports so far from different sources about exactly the 2 tests mean, the submarine earlier and now the short-range missiles. Now we see Washington trying to dismiss to a certain extent the importance technologically about these two tests, obviously there is also negotiation in Washington's mind not to set too high a bar for the enemy, quote unquote. Ms. Kim, what do you say, given your knowledge of the security issue as well, about these two tests and the sophistication of these two tests?
Well, I would say that the United States downplaying the severity of yesterday's missile tests is an indication that they do not want to elevate tensions right now with North Korea, especially with the momentum being stalled, and there's interest on the United States' part to get something across the table to North Korea so that we can get a deal. Now, as far as the technical specifications go, I understand that this is a 600-mile range that is considered to be a violation of United States Security Council's resolutions that clearly ban the testing of ballistic missile tests. So to elevate the status, to give importance to it, would be to give a nod to the North Koreans that we are acknowledging what's going on, and that the threshold for pain, and when it comes to dealing with North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities, has gotten up so high that we've become to accept these threats as just part of the norm, and to be actually a little bit grateful that things could not be any worse.
If you look at that, Mr. Zhao, this is not long after the so-called restart of denuclearization talk agreed by the two leaders coming from DPRK and the United States. And this time, the DPRK media particularly focused on the role of the leader in DPRK in making sure the launch is successful. As we know, it fired 2 short-range missiles on Thursday morning, reports said. This second missile appeared to be, quote, a new design that had not been seen before. They both reached an altitude of 50 kilometers before splashing down, indicating they are short-range missiles and they fly low and could make in-flight guidance adjustments. Both capabilities exploit weakness of Patriot missile batteries and THAAD anti-missile defense system. Now we all remember those keywords, that system. In the region, Mr. Zhao, your comment.
Well, I slightly disagree with our American colleague that North Korea only made modest technical improvement. I think this type of missile that North Korea just tested indicate that they do have some maneuverability during flight. Based on the illustration on Kim Jong-un's computer screen, the missile actually flied up first and then turned downward and then glided for a little while before pulling up again and then strike target eventually. So that represents some, a capability that is similar to what we often call a booster glider. Maybe that not as advanced as a typical booster glider, but still it represents a very impressive technical breakthrough on the North Korean part, especially considering all the harsh sanctions and resource restraints on North Korea.
What is the function of a booster glider, Mr. Zhao?
That's a capability that enables a missile to maneuver during its flight, and so that it can evade the interception by missile defense systems. So North Korea could indicate by showing this capability that it can neutralize the THAAD and Patriot systems deployed by South Korea. So it's a message to South Korea and the United States that given time, North Korea can make more harm. It can make more significant improvement to its current strategic nuclear capabilities.
Mr. Rohan, it's very interesting that Mr. Zhao, given the very last sentence of his answer, he mentioned North Korea is giving the message both to the United States and to South Korea. But that's exactly what I really want to ask. Is it a message to South Korea, the neighbor, or is it a message to Washington, which has been agreeing earlier, just months ago, some denuclearization talk, and it didn't happen yet?
Well, first of all, Mr. Zhao does make a good point that when I say there's only a modest improvement, I actually am not sure that the Patriot system is going to be able to intercept systematically and comprehensively all the previous North Korean missiles that were simpler, because missile defense systems don't always work, and they get saturated. They run out of missiles. So, but I think Mr. Zhao still does make a good point that, in fact, maneuverability is a meaningful military step forward. So I will acknowledge that very valid point. In terms of who's being messaged here, whether it's Seoul or Washington, you know, I think the North Koreans are just trying to break the logjam in the negotiations any way they can. And the only person who seems to get spared their invective and their insult is Donald Trump. I think they decided to protect him because Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump have this special relationship, and they also understand that President Trump can be a little bit volatile, and so you don't want to risk getting on his bad side. But they're prepared to disrupt relations with John Bolton or Mike Pompeo or President Moon of South Korea, depending on what they think will give a new impetus to the negotiation process. And so I don't really think fundamentally they're trying to distinguish that much South Korea from the United States in general terms. At this particular moment, I think what they're trying to do is get all of our attention, because I think Washington is a little bit paralyzed by a debate inside the administration as to whether to go for complete North Korean denuclearization, all-in-one agreement, or whether to be more step-by-step and lift some of the sanctions in exchange for elimination of the nuclear production infrastructure as sort of an interim step. And I think, so therefore, Washington and Seoul are both being messaged by North Korea at the moment, I believe.
Interesting. Ms. Kim, therefore, what do you consider as the reason why Washington has not been yet proactive in trying to restart the talk? Is it because of the reason mentioned by Mr. O'Hanlon about this internal debate as to what should be the end result, at least of this round of talks? Or is it Washington feeling that the time is on its clock, and therefore let the DPRK hang out there and make them nervous as a part of the negotiation strategy? Ms. Kim.
Well, I do agree that there seems to be a disagreement or a disconnect between, in the stated goal, the end goal of denuclearization of North Korea, whether that's going to be a freeze or a complete package where North Korea completely dismantles its facilities, where it comes up with a declaration of all its weapons and sites. That's still under debate. But what's really interesting is that the timeline is not actually in favor of Washington. It's always been in North Korea's favor. And for the United States to quickly agree to, I would say, a fourth summit now with North Korea would be to, without having really prepared a strategy, without really having prepared basically what it is that we want from North Korea, what we want to see in this fourth round of talks, without having that clear vision, we walk into the room again facing North Korea without having anything to come back to. That's going to put a lot of criticism on the administration. You know, 1, 2, 3 strikes already. To have a fourth strike without a declaration, without a really tangible denuclearization agreement or anything to get the process going is really going to place criticism on President Trump. And we understand also that he has to think about the elections that are coming up next year as well. So there's a lot of you know, administrative and also personal interests that are at play right now.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Zhao, therefore, it's very interesting, the situation. Now, we all know DPRK is already a de facto nuclear state in a way. And therefore, for the DPRK, it is a continuity if they continue to do further tests as they did over the past few weeks. However, it does want to talk to Washington, but it does not trust Washington. So if we were in the shoes of the DPRK, what do you think the most likely choices they are going to make, including the recent show-off and some of the future, immediate future actions?
Well, I think that really depends on what's the exact domestic situation in DPRK, especially in the economic domain. people have been speculating why after so long under serious economic sanctions, North Korean economy is still doing okay, North Korea is still holding on, rejecting complete denuclearization. There are two theories. One is North Korea is really doing okay economically. It can get critical resources. It can make its economy develop by conducting domestic reform. The other theory is no, actually North Korea is simply putting on a show. It is painting a picture of a stable economic situation, but in fact it is running out of critical resources and it cannot hold on for much longer. That second theory makes some sense. I think it can explain some of the recent stepping up of tensions by DPRK, the resuming of short-range missile tests multiple times so far, the official revelation of its ballistic missile submarine. That's first time since the start of the diplomatic charm offensive by North Korea early last year.
So you think it's more internal pressure, domestic politics-driven pressure, rather than trying to test Washington?
I think it could be driven by a grave economic situation in North Korea. North Korea badly needs economic sanction relief, so it is using these military provocations to pressure Washington to make more and quicker concessions on the critical issue of sanction relief.
Ms. Kim, let me come back to you because you've been analyzing North Korea for quite a long time. Now, we do understand, coming from the UN public source, that there have been drought and floods and natural disasters. The output of the food has been smaller than it used to be. The food proportion for every North Korean have been going down from 500 kilo to about 300, which is almost half than it used to be. So would you like to help us understand how does that work? The internal pressure or agenda difficulties with the so-called international relations strategy, it's a security strategy. Ms. Kim, if you can.
I think we have to go back to the nucleus of North Korea, and that's the Kim Jong-un regime. Even though North Korea might be having issues with the drought, with the food issue, we just saw recently that it was so hesitant to accept South Korea's food aid package that it rejected it. So that also indicates that it's not just about the pressing needs of the people, but it's about what Kim needs to get in order to achieve his ultimate goal. And that goal is it's always been for North Korea to break the South Korea-U.S. alliance, to expel the U.S. forces out of South Korea, and to get rid of the deterrence in the region, and to bring South Korea to the point where it feels so intimidated that it will succumb to North Korea's demands, and to actually ultimately reunify the two countries. So the internal factors certainly do play a role in shifting Kim Jong-un's calculus a little bit, but he's not really straight from his course of building up his nuclear capabilities and using it as bargaining chips to talk to the United States, to talk to South Korea, and also to engage regional partners like China and Russia to take his position.
Yeah. Mr. O'Hanlon, since Ms. Kim mentioned South Korea a lot in her answer, this is a fascinating question. We see there have been a lot of issues recently South Korea got itself or being got into. For example, trade issue with Japan, the alliance issue with the United States, whether South Korea trusts the United States now in this triangle relationship, and what would that mean for South Korea relation with the United States, and the joint military exercise. As a result of that, South Korea was pressured by North Korea about, with the latest test. So a lot of things going on right here about South Korea. What do you make of the realities that South Korea is facing right now? It's been working to facilitate the Panmunjom meeting between Trump and Kim, and now South Korea is facing a huge dilemma of its own without any help from any of the two.
Yes, South Korea is in a tough spot, although I actually believe the U.S.-South Korea alliance is in pretty good shape by comparison, let's say, with 2017, when President Trump came in and obviously had a lot of negative views towards that alliance. And then in 2018, even though things were somewhat repaired, he continued to force this issue of demanding more host nation payment by South Korea for the costs that U.S. forces incur by being based in South Korea. This year, it's been, at least the last few months, it feels to me a little quieter in the U.S.-ROK relationship overall. We also have not seen a big new escalation on the trade front in bilateral economic relations. So I actually think the United States is proving at the moment to be a pretty dependable friend of South Korea. But the ROK-Japan relationship is in very bad shape, and frankly, remarkably bad shape. I think it would have been quite difficult to predict just how far backward things could go, and how much the history question could come back to the fore again. And of course, Chinese understand this very well, because Chinese and Japanese have a lot of the same kinds of historical issues, and Chinese have a lot of the same criticisms of Japan based on behavior in the early 20th century that Korea does. And so I think both Korea and China have deep suspicions about Japan, and any time there's an issue that reignites that history question, it really proves to be an unresolved matter in dealings with both the South Korean and the Chinese people.
Well, I guess maybe the U.S. is more now thinking about, if it does think in that way, where to go and whether a strategy already drawn up. Mr. Zhao, about your comment here, denuclearization talk is never just about denuclearization talk, isn't it? It's about security guarantee, it's about the relations in the region, it's about where the potential is economically for the region, it's about the alliance relationship, all of this very complicated issues. So what do you make of this very entangled things now reflected in the latest test by the DPRK, Mr. Zhao?
And adding to the complexity of that,
there
is always misleading messages. For example, North Korea, officially declared why it was testing missiles was because North Korea is displeased with the joint exercises and the South Korean introduction of F-35 fighter jets. But in fact, those are not South Koreans' fault. The joint exercises were already scaled down, and the introduction of the F-35 has been in the deliberation in South Korea for a while. So I think we have to look beyond the surface, look beyond their declaratory policy. In terms of denuclearization, there's a recent change of North Korean position. They used to focus a lot on economic sanction relief, but recently they are re-emphasizing importance for South Korea and the United States to provide security guarantee. However, I don't think that's the real intent of North Korea. North Korea is unlikely to trust the security guarantee from South Korea and the United States. But in fact, I think that's the North Korean tactic, to say that, okay, in order for you to provide a real security guarantee, you have to reduce or decrease or even get rid of the military alliance, which I know you won't be able to do. So let's talk about, what is easier, which is economic sanction relief. So it's, the different signaling, false message is indeed make this game even more complicated.
Well, I hope it's a game, but it's not, right? It's a very serious matter. We're talking about the security of the region. Before we go, may I ask a very bold question to every one of you, and just one answer, one sentence to explain why you think so. When do you think the restart of the denuclearization talk would really happen between DPRK and the United States? Mr. O'Hanlon, one answer, one reason.
Probably this fall, because I really think both countries need it, and President Trump needs this for his re-election campaign as a major foreign policy success. North Korea needs the sanctions relief.
Mr. Zhao?
Well, I hope the operational negotiation would restart soon, but the summit-level meeting between presidents looks like will take longer to take place.
Got it. Ms. Kim, last but not least.
Well, we have to keep in mind the year-end deadline from Kim Jong-un, so I would assume that working-level talks or something of that nature would be, trickling up to that point, and that's because, as the previous panels have said, that it's because of the elections. Yes.
Soo Kim, Michael O'Hanlon, Zhao Tong, Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. Thank you.